Unless you're a hardcore wrestling historian, chances are you've never heard the name Norval Austin, and that's a shame. Born on March 9th, 1951, Austin had a wrestling career that spanned over 30 years, starting in 1971 and wrapping up in 2004. He spent most of his time in the Southern Territories, where he became known for his work in tag teams. He wasn't just good, he was a boundary breaker, but today his name is barely a footnote in wrestling history. So why has Norval Austin been forgotten? Why has someone with such a long and influential career faded so far into the background? One major reason is visibility. Norval spent most of his time wrestling in regional territories like Florida, Alabama, and Tennessee. Back then, wrestling was split into territories. There was no internet, no YouTube, no Peacock, and very few of those old matches were taped, let alone preserved. These smaller promotions weren't connected to the massive WWE archive we have today. So a lot of what Norval did just isn't available to watch anymore. That's why some wrestling historians call him a forgotten star from a forgotten era. The places he worked, like Southeastern Championship Wrestling, are sometimes dismissed as deep cuts. His career tells a bigger story about race, wrestling, and how quickly history can forget the people who helped change it. So let's go back to where it all began, because Norval Austin's story deserves to be remembered. Norval Austin started wrestling in 1971. He worked mostly in Florida and Alabama during the early years, and this was a time when segregation wasn't just part of everyday life. It was part of wrestling too. Back then, black wrestlers were booked very differently from white wrestlers. Most of the time, they were only allowed to wrestle other black wrestlers. If they ever went up against a white opponent, they had to be the good guy. That meant no cheating, no dirty tricks, no playing the villain. They had to be clean-cut, respectful, and silent in the face of racism. Norval followed those rules early on. He was booked as a babyface, which is the wrestling term for a good guy, and he mostly worked singles matches. At the time, there were barely any all-black tag teams in Southern promotions. It just wasn't something promoters were willing to put in front of their audiences. But even with those limits, Norval started to make a name for himself. In October 1973, he won the NWA Mississippi Heavyweight Championship. That was a big deal. Titles like that weren't usually given to black wrestlers at the time, especially in the South. It wasn't just a win, it was a breakthrough. It showed that Norval had the talent and the crowd support to rise above the usual barriers. Even though he preferred singles competition, promoters kept putting him in tag matches. That was where they saw the most value in him. And to be fair, he was great at it. He held tag team titles with a variety of partners, like Butch Malone, Bill Dundee, Pat Barrett, and Jimmy Golden. He worked in places like Gulf Coast Championship Wrestling and NWA Mid-America. He worked hard and won often. Still, his career during this time was shaped by a hard truth. He was talented. He was a pioneer. But he was also working in a system that didn't give him the freedom to fully shine on his own. The old rules were still in place, and they made it harder for black wrestlers to stand out individually, especially in the South. Even when Norval did something historic, the industry didn't always know what to do with him. That's one of the reasons he's not more well-known today. His legacy was built inside a box. And even when he pushed against it, the system tried to close it again. Everything changed in late 1971. That's when Norval Austin was paired with a white wrestler named Sputnik Monroe. If you've never heard of Monroe, here's what you need to know. He was a rebel, a troublemaker, a white guy who refused to play by the rules of segregation. He drank in black bars. He ate in black restaurants. He got arrested more than once just for hanging out with black fans. He even told promoters in Memphis that he wouldn't wrestle unless black fans were allowed to sit anywhere in the arena, not just in the colored section. And since he was a big draw, the promoters gave in. They desegregated the crowd. So when Monroe and Austin became a tag team, and not just any tag team but a heel team, it was explosive. They didn't try to hide from the controversy. They leaned into it. Norval dyed a blonde streak in his hair to match Monroe's. They hinted that maybe Norval was Monroe's son. They teased the crowd with uncomfortable storylines and never backed down. In one especially wild moment, they poured black paint over a white wrestler named Robert Fuller. Monroe yelled, "Black is beautiful," and Norval answered, "White is wonderful." It was shocking. The fans were furious. People screamed racial slurs. They threw things. The reaction was loud, angry, and dangerous. But it was also exactly what they were trying to create. They were using the crowd's hate to tell a bigger story. They were putting racism on display and forcing people to react. And even through all the chaos, they were winning. In 1972, Austin and Monroe won the NWA Mid-America Southern Tag Team Championship. Later that year, they also won the NWA Florida Tag Team titles. They even went on tour in Japan. That showed just how far their reach could go, even while based in southern U.S. territories. By 1975, the team broke up. Norvell wanted to go back to singles matches, but those few years with Monroe left a permanent mark on the business. Monroe would later be praised for breaking color lines in Memphis. He even helped push integration in the city's music scene. But Norvell, who stood right beside him and took all the same heat from the crowd, didn't get that same level of credit. After Norvell Austin finished his run with Sputnik Monroe, he didn't slow down, not even a little. He stayed active in wrestling for years and kept making an impact. Most of his best work came through tag team wrestling. That's where he really shined, and during this time he became part of two of the most creative and memorable teams in wrestling history. In 1981, Norvell helped create the first version of the Midnight Express. This was before the name became famous nationwide. This original group included Norvell Austin, Dennis Condrey, and Randy Rose. They worked mainly in the Southern Territories, especially in the Continental Wrestling Association, also known as the CWA. These three made a strong trio. They won the AWA Southern Tag Team Championship, but it wasn't just the wins that made them special. It was the way they worked as a team. They came up with a new idea that kept fans guessing. Instead of just having two guys hold the tag titles, all three members were part of the team. On any given night, any two of them could defend the belts. This gave them an advantage because their opponents never knew exactly who they'd be facing. That rule would later be known as the Freebird Rule. But here's the thing. Norvell and the original Midnight Express did it first, even before the fabulous Freebirds made it famous. This was one of those moments in wrestling where something small ended up becoming a big deal later. But like a lot of things in Norvell Austin's career, the credit didn't go to him. It went to the ones who came along afterward in bigger promotions. After the Midnight Express split up in 1983, Norvell didn't miss a beat. He went back to Memphis and started a new team with Koko B. Ware. This was the birth of the Pretty Young Things, also known as the PYT Express. This team was different from anything fans had seen before. Norvell and Koko leaned into the pop culture of the time. They dressed like Michael Jackson, with red leather jackets and one white glove. They even came to the ring using Jackson's song PYT as their entrance music. That was bold, it was cool, and it helped them stand out. They were one of the first tag teams to really connect their look and vibe to what was happening in music and fashion at the time. They weren't just flashy though, they were good in the ring. In February 1984, the Pretty Young Things beat Elijah Akeem and Kareem Muhammad to win the AWA Southern Tag Team titles. They didn't stop there. They beat the Fabulous Ones 2 more times to win the belts again. Then in February 1985, they won the NWA Florida United States Tag Team Championship. Their matches were fun, their look was fresh, and the crowds loved or hated them depending on the night. Either way, people were paying attention. Austin and Koko brought something new to wrestling. They were blending pop culture with wrestling characters in a way that made sense. They didn't just play roles, they created a vibe. That style would later become the norm, but they were doing it early, before it was mainstream. By the time the Pretty Young Things split up in 1985, Norvell had already helped shape 2 big tag teams. Both were creative, both had something fresh to offer, and in both teams, Norvell wasn't just showing up. He was leading the way. Even though tag teams were where he got the most attention, Norvell Austin also had a singles career. One interesting fact that not many people know is that early on, he used the name the Junkyard Dog. That's right. Long before Sylvester Ritter made the name famous on a national level, Norvell had already used it in the Southern Territories. That's another example of something that started with Norvell, but became famous later through someone else. Norvell also teamed up with Paul Orndorff, and the two won tag team titles in Southeastern Championship Wrestling. He had a heated feud with exotic Adrian Street, who at the time was the NWA Southeastern Heavyweight Champion. That storyline got fans invested, and it was one of the more intense rivalries of the period. Later, Norville became part of Jimmy Hart's First Family, a group of villain wrestlers in Memphis. Hart was a well-known manager, and being part of his group helped Norville stay in the spotlight for a while longer. Norville continued wrestling all over the South throughout the 1980s and 1990s. He didn't move to the national stage like some others did, but he never stopped working. His last recorded match came in 2004, marking more than 30 years in the ring. That's a long time in a tough business, and he was part of it through multiple eras, from the old-school segregated days to the more modern, character-driven world. So here's the question. If Norville Austin helped create some of the best tag teams of his time, if he used the Freebird rule before it was famous, if he brought pop culture into wrestling before it became normal, then why don't more fans know who he is? It comes down to one thing: exposure. Before wrestling went national, it was split into territories. That meant every part of the country had its own wrestling shows, its own champions, and its own local stars. Norville Austin mostly wrestled in the South in places like Alabama, Florida, and Tennessee. He worked for promotions like Southeastern Wrestling, Continental Championship Wrestling, and Gulf Coast Wrestling. These were strong promotions, and fans in those areas loved them. But outside those places, people just didn't see the shows. There was no YouTube, no internet. If you didn't live in the area, you probably had no idea who the local stars were. On top of that, very little of it was recorded or saved. Back then, taping shows cost a lot of money. And even if they were taped, most of the footage wasn't archived. It got thrown out or lost. That's why you can barely find any old Norville Austin matches today. Some people even call Southeastern Wrestling the Forgotten Territory. That's because there's barely any footage left. Wrestling writer Dave Meltzer once called it the lost promotion. So already that's strike one against Norville's legacy. Most people just never saw his work, and now it's hard to go back and find it. But there's more. The guys who ran those Southern promotions, like Ron Fuller and Lee Fields, made a decision to keep their shows quiet. They didn't let magazines cover their wrestlers. They didn't allow interviews backstage. They wanted to protect the storylines and keep everything looking real. That made sense back then. They were trying to protect the magic of wrestling, but it had a downside. Because no one outside the territory was writing about what was happening, those stories and careers weren't being saved. So when wrestling started going national in the 1980s, the spotlight moved, and it never came back. Even though Norville Austin isn't a household name, his contributions to wrestling are too important to forget. He was one of the first black wrestlers to play a heel in the segregated South. And he did it in bold, unforgettable fashion alongside Sputnik Monroe. That team didn't just push buttons, they pushed boundaries. Together, they challenged racial norms in a time and place where that was dangerous. They got people talking, and they helped change what was possible in wrestling. He was also ahead of the curve when it came to tag team innovation. With the original Midnight Express, Austin helped create the Freebird rule, where any two members of a three-man team could defend the tag titles. That idea is still used today by teams like the New Day. Then came the Pretty Young Things. With Koko B. Ware, Austin helped bring pop culture into the ring in a way nobody had done before. They dressed like Michael Jackson, they had theme music, they had swagger, and they showed that wrestling characters could feel modern, fun, and connected to what was happening in the world. Norville Austin didn't just keep up with the times, he was ahead of them. His story also reminds us why it's important to preserve wrestling history. Not just the big names, not just the WWE legends, but the regional stars, the innovators, the ones who helped shape the business from the ground up. There are so many names like Norville Austin who played huge roles in building wrestling's foundation, and too many of them have already faded from view. We can't bring back the lost footage, but we can keep telling the stories. Norville Austin's career may have been confined to the territories, but his impact went far beyond them. His work helped lay the groundwork for everything that came after. And even if the cameras weren't always rolling, what he did mattered. So maybe it's time we stop calling him a forgotten star, because now we remember. Wrestling history has a lot of stories like this, and we think they're worth telling. If you like this video, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe for more. We're digging into more hidden histories and forgotten legends, so there's plenty more to come. Let us know in the comments if you'd heard of Norville Austin before, or if there's someone else you think more fans should know about. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Brutus Beefcake is almost 70 years old now, but his life took a dark turn after a horrific accident that crushed his face and nearly killed him. What followed was a spiral of failed wrestling gimmicks, broken friendships, and a shocking drug scandal that made national news. This is the tragic story of how one of wrestling's most colorful characters lost everything. On July 4th, 1990, Edward Leslie was living his dream. Known to millions as Brutus the Barber Beefcake, he was one of the biggest stars in professional wrestling. He had just finished a successful run hosting his own talk show segment called The Barbershop. Fans loved his quirky character, who would cut his opponent's hair after winning matches. He was even being considered for a championship title run. But in one terrible moment, everything changed. Leslie was enjoying a vacation in Florida when he decided to try parasailing. The activity seemed harmless enough. But as he was preparing to take off, another parasailer lost control nearby. The out-of-control rider slammed into Leslie's face at over 35 miles per hour. The impact was devastating. Leslie later described it as being hit in the face by a wooden board sticking out of a speeding truck. His face was completely crushed. His skull was shattered. The damage was so severe that doctors didn't think he would survive. Emergency surgery lasted 7 hours. When he finally woke up, he was blind and could only eat liquid food. The accident destroyed Leslie in ways that went beyond the physical damage. He suffered severe memory loss and couldn't remember most of his high school years. It took almost 5 years for all the swelling in his head to go down completely. The man who had been on top of the wrestling world was now fighting just to survive. Hulk Hogan rushed to be by his friend's side during this dark time. Hogan paid Leslie's massive medical bills and helped with his recovery. But even Hogan's support couldn't fix what had been broken. When Leslie finally returned to wrestling in 1993, he had to wear a protective face mask. The injury had ended his chance at becoming a main event star. The accident marked the beginning of Leslie's slow decline. When he followed Hogan to World Championship Wrestling in 1994, things got even worse. The WWF owned the rights to his Brutus Beefcake name and the Barber character. This meant Leslie had to reinvent himself from scratch. What followed was a parade of failed wrestling personas that became embarrassing to watch. First, he tried being Brother Broody alongside Hogan. Fans didn't care. Then he became the Clipmaster, which was quickly scrapped. After that came the Butcher, a menacing character that turned on Hogan in storylines. But the character changes didn't stop there. Leslie became the Man with No Name, then the Man with No Face, even though viewers could clearly see his face. He tried being the Zodiac as part of a spooky wrestling group. When that failed, he became the Booty Man, a ridiculous character that made fans cringe. None of these gimmicks worked. Fellow wrestlers started to whisper that Leslie was only getting TV time because of his friendship with Hogan. Greg Valentine, who had been Leslie's tag team partner during his successful years, confirmed that losing the Barber character had destroyed Leslie's career. Without that gimmick, he was just another wrestler with no clear identity. The constant character changes made Leslie look desperate and out of touch. Fans began to see him as someone who was taking up TV time that could go to more talented wrestlers. Even wrestling executives got tired of trying to make him work. One report said that WCW boss Eric Bischoff eventually stopped trying to repackage Leslie altogether. During this time, Leslie's personal life was falling apart too. His relationship with Hulk Hogan, once rock solid, began to crack. Hogan reportedly didn't like Leslie's new wife, Missy. This created tension between the two men who had been like brothers for decades. Things got worse when rumors spread that Leslie was forging Hogan's autograph to sell at wrestling conventions. Fans who bought what they thought were genuine Hogan signatures were actually getting fakes made by Leslie. When Hogan confronted his old friend about this, Leslie denied it, but the damage to their friendship was already done. The breaking point came during a 2008 incident where Hogan was reportedly cold and rude to Leslie's wife. After that, the two men barely spoke. Their once unbreakable bond had been shattered by money problems, family drama, and broken trust. Leslie's problems weren't limited to wrestling and friendship drama. After leaving WCW in 1999, he struggled to find steady work. His money was stolen, forcing him to sell his home and move to Boston. For 12 years, he worked as a toll collector for the subway system, a far cry from his days as a wrestling superstar. But even that humble job led to disaster. On February 4, 2004, Leslie made national headlines for all the wrong reasons. While working his shift as a fare collector at Boston's downtown Crossing subway station, he accidentally left a bag of white powder in his booth. When the next shift arrived, they found the mysterious substance and panicked. Leslie was forced to admit that the drugs were his. The admission was humiliating for a man who had once been a role model to children. He checked himself into a drug rehabilitation facility, but the damage to his reputation was permanent. The subway authority fired him immediately. Leslie later tried to claim the substance was just aspirin that had spilled, but no one believed him. The incident made him a laughingstock and showed how far he had fallen from his wrestling glory days. Leslie had gone from being stuck in what he called a toll booth in Chinatown with the prostitutes and the bums and the rats to being a national embarrassment. His wife Missy stood by him during this dark period, providing him with a place to live when he was homeless and helping him through his addiction recovery. The years that followed were quiet ones for Leslie. He made occasional appearances at small wrestling shows and autograph signings, but his days as a relevant performer were over. Most fans remembered him more for his scandals than his wrestling achievements. In 2019, Leslie was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. Hulk Hogan, despite their strained relationship, presented him for the honor. It was a moment that should have been the highlight of Leslie's later years, but the induction felt more like a pity award than recognition of genuine achievement. Today, at almost 70 years old, Leslie works as a commissioner for a small wrestling promotion in Florida. He lives quietly with his wife and daughter outside of Boston, managing a Planet Fitness gym. It's a normal life, but a far cry from the fame and fortune he once enjoyed. Leslie's story is one of missed opportunities and bad choices. The parasailing accident wasn't his fault, but everything that followed showed a man who couldn't adapt to life after his peak. His dependence on Hulk Hogan, his constant character changes, and his drug problems all contributed to a sad decline. The man who once made millions of fans cheer by cutting his opponent's hair ended up cutting away pieces of his own life until almost nothing remained. His legacy isn't the joy he brought to wrestling fans, but the cautionary tale of how quickly fame can disappear. Brutus Beefcake's story proves that sometimes the barber ends up getting cut the deepest of all. What do you think went wrong in Brutus Beefcake's life? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed learning about wrestling's forgotten stars, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more content like this.
The swing and a push over, playing the to action.
Remember the guy who clucked like a rooster in the ring? Yeah, that was Terry Taylor. But there's a lot more to his story than a bad gimmick. Today, he's 69, so where is he now? And what really happened behind the scenes? Terry started wrestling back in 1979. He was really good in the ring, like technically solid. He wasn't the flashiest guy, but he could wrestle, and people respected that. He worked all over the country during the territory days, back when wrestling wasn't national. He won a bunch of championships and quickly became known as one of the most reliable guys in the business. He could do different styles too. In Texas, where the wrestling was harder and more real looking, he fit right in. He knew how to make a match look good. So for about 10 years, Terry was doing great. Then in 1988, he joined the WWF. That's where everything changed. Instead of building on his solid reputation, they gave him this crazy character called the Red Rooster. It was weird. He wore red, styled his hair to look like a rooster comb, and acted like a chicken. Yes, strutting, pecking, and even saying, cock-a-doodle-doo. It became one of the most laughed at gimmicks in wrestling history. Some people think the gimmick was actually a punishment. There were rumors that Terry had a habit of reporting other wrestlers to management, and they gave him this embarrassing character to make fun of him. JBL even said the whole thing was a joke from The Office just to humiliate him. Terry himself said he hated it at first, but took the job because he needed the money. And once he accepted it, he tried to have fun with it. He leaned into the bird jokes and made it work the best he could. But let's be honest, it didn't help his career. The Red Rooster gimmick basically locked him into mid-card matches. He rarely won and usually looked silly. That gimmick followed him around for the rest of his career, even though he was a great wrestler before all that. After his time in the ring slowed down, Terry moved into backstage roles. He worked in WCW in the late 90s as a booker and road agent. He helped put together matches and storylines. Some say he even had a hand in the big NWO storyline, which was one of WCW's biggest successes. But he also had problems with some of the top guys: Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and Eric Bischoff. There was a lot of tension, and he eventually left WCW. He then worked for WWF again, and later in TNA from 2003 to 2011. In TNA, he helped with creative stuff, trained talent, and worked behind the scenes. He always pushed the idea that wrestling wasn't just about moves. It was about emotions and storytelling. He wanted people to care about what was happening in the ring. He stayed with TNA until 2012, when Bruce Pritchard replaced him. But here's where things get messy. A lot of people didn't like working with Terry behind the scenes. So what happened? Why did so many people have a problem with him? Well, the biggest thing people said was that Terry acted like an office stooge. That means they thought he was too close to management and would run off to report on what other wrestlers were doing wrong. Kind of like being the teacher's pet in school, but worse. JBL once said the whole Red Rooster gimmick was a rib, a joke played on Terry because of this exact reason. Whether that's true or not, the fact that people believed it shows how much that image stuck with him. But that's just the start. There were other, more serious claims too. Some wrestlers believed that Terry used his power backstage to hurt people he didn't like. Scotty Riggs once said that Terry purposely booked him badly in WCW. Why? Because of a personal issue involving an ex-girlfriend. That's pretty wild if true, and it makes people wonder how much personal drama was affecting professional decisions. Scott Steiner wasn't a fan either. He reportedly cussed Terry out backstage and accused him of trying to mess up his career. Psycho Sid had a similar story. He said Terry would use his agent role to create power for himself and had a weird way of rubbing people the wrong way. Sid even mentioned a time when a friend of his was getting a tryout and Terry somehow got in the way. And it doesn't stop there. Online, especially in Reddit threads where fans and insiders chat, there have been some heavy accusations. People have called Terry racist and sexist. Some posts point to a lawsuit from the year 2000 where Terry was accused of saying that white wrestlers were better than black ones. That's a strong accusation and definitely crosses a line. There was also talk of someone named Terry writing articles with racist undertones, though it's not fully clear if that was Terry Taylor or someone else. As for how he treated women, some say it wasn't great. There are claims he treated female talent badly and was just plain disrespectful. One comment said he treated women like garbage and would call up old contacts asking about female wrestlers in a creepy way. Again, these are serious claims and not easy to ignore. But here's the thing, it's not all one-sided. Some people actually felt bad for Terry. Disco Inferno, who was around during those WCW days, said Terry took a lot of abuse from the big stars like Randy Savage, Scott Steiner, and Kevin Nash. He said Terry got treated badly and that the people in charge didn't protect him. So while some saw him as a guy who used his power in the wrong way, others saw him as someone who got stuck in the middle and took the heat without any support. Even Larry Zbyszko, another wrestling veteran, chimed in. He said that while he knew Scott Steiner had a short temper, he didn't personally see Terry getting bullied. Larry mostly stayed away from the backstage drama, so he didn't witness it himself, but his comments still show that not everyone had the full picture. Now, what does Terry himself say about all this? He hasn't responded to every single story, but he has spoken generally about how fans often don't know what really goes on behind the scenes. He said decisions in wrestling aren't always simple. There's office politics, injuries, contract stuff, personal drama, all sorts of things that fans never see. He compared it to someone blindfolded trying to describe an elephant just by touching its tail. You only get a small part of the picture, not the whole thing. So maybe Terry wasn't always trying to be the bad guy. Maybe he was just dealing with a complicated, high-pressure job in a business where everyone's looking out for themselves. Still, when so many people have bad stories about you, it's hard to just brush them off. Whether it was from real actions or just misunderstandings, Terry gained a reputation for being someone who didn't always get along with others backstage. Wrestling, especially in the 80s and 90s, was a wild and intense place. There were huge egos, lots of power plays, and not much protection for people trying to do their jobs. Maybe Terry made mistakes. Maybe he let personal issues get in the way of his work. Or maybe he was a guy caught in the middle of all the chaos, trying to hold it together while taking fire from both sides. Even after all the ups and downs in his career, Terry Taylor is still very much part of the wrestling world. A lot of people might think he faded away after the Red Rooster gimmick or after all that backstage drama. But that's not true. Since 2012, Terry has been working with WWE as a trainer. He is based at the WWE Performance Center in Orlando, Florida. That is where young wrestlers train to become the next big superstars. Terry is not just a quiet coach in the background. He is actually an important part of the team. The Performance Center has many experienced trainers, and together they bring hundreds of years of knowledge. Terry brings a lot of that himself. He has seen every side of wrestling, from small local shows to big TV moments, from the good days to the tough ones. Now he uses all that experience to guide the younger generation. His job at the Performance Center is very hands-on. He runs training sessions with NXT wrestlers. He watches their matches and gives feedback. He even makes them study old matches to learn the basics. Terry is known for teaching the simple and important parts of wrestling, not just the flashy moves. He believes wrestling is about telling a story in the ring. It is about knowing when to slow down, when to connect with the crowd, and when to build emotion. Terry also says wrestling takes time. You cannot learn it all in a few months. It takes years of hard work and patience. He tells young wrestlers to stay focused and to never stop learning. One of his strong beliefs is that the fans should not control the match. In his words, the audience does not tell him what to do. He believes the wrestlers are the ones who should guide the story. That is a very old school way of thinking, and he stands by it. What is interesting is how well respected he is by the younger wrestlers today. Many of them have said great things about Terry. Joaquin Wilde from NXT is one of them. He said Terry taught him so much. At first, Joaquin found him a little scary because of how much respect he had. But over time, he earned Terry's trust. Now he says Terry is full of gold, and his knowledge is like treasure. Adam Cole also praised Terry. He said Terry taught him the value of being fully committed in the ring. These kinds of words show that Terry is making a real difference. Even with the tough stories from his past, today's talent sees him as a mentor and a guide. So how do we look at Terry Taylor's full career? It is a long and complicated one. He started off strong as a great technical wrestler in the territory days. Many people believed he could be a top star. But then came the Red Rooster character. It was silly and it didn't match his skills. That moment became a symbol of how wrestling gimmicks can hold someone back. Sometimes it's not about talent, it's about what the company gives you. After that, Terry moved into backstage roles. He became a writer, a booker, and later worked in talent relations. These jobs gave him power, but they also brought a lot of blame. Some wrestlers said he buried their careers. Some said he had grudges and used his position to hurt others. There were even serious accusations of racism and sexism. These are not small claims, and they added a lot of controversy to his name. Terry did speak out at times. He said fans often don't see what really goes on backstage. There are office politics, personal problems, injuries, and contract issues. These things affect decisions. Terry said that people only see a small part of the story. It's like touching the tail of an elephant and thinking you know the whole animal. No matter what, one thing is clear. Terry never left the business. He stayed involved and kept working. Even when people criticized him, he kept showing up. That kind of dedication is rare. And now at 69 years old, he is still coaching and helping the stars of tomorrow. Terry Taylor's career shows how wrestling is full of highs and lows. Some fans remember him as the Red Rooster. Others remember the backstage stories. But the new generation sees him as a teacher. Someone who gives honest advice. Someone who cares about the future of wrestling. And maybe that is what makes his story so interesting. He is not just a character from the past. He is still here, still helping, still shaping the future. In a world where careers come and go, Terry Taylor is still part of the show. Not in the spotlight, but behind the curtain, guiding the next wave of talent. That is the story of Terry Taylor, a man with a career full of twists, a man who made mistakes, learned from them, and stayed in the game. A man who now helps others avoid the same bumps he once hit. In wrestling, that kind of journey matters. Love him or hate him, you can't deny that he's stayed in the business for decades. That takes grit, patience, and a deep love for wrestling. Today, while he's no longer in the spotlight, he's helping shape the next generation of WWE stars. And for many of them, he's not just a coach, he's a mentor, a guide, and someone they truly look up to. So what do you think about Terry Taylor? Was he misunderstood? Was he treated unfairly? Or did he bring some of it on himself? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on more wrestling stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care and keep the passion for wrestling alive. Bobby Fulton is one of those names that true wrestling fans never really forget. If you followed wrestling back in the day, especially in the 1980s and early 90s, you probably remember the Fantastics. They weren't just another tag team. They brought something different to the ring: energy, excitement, and heart. And at the center of all that was Bobby Fulton. Now here we are in 2025, and Bobby's nearly 64 years old. You don't hear his name in the mainstream much anymore. There's no Hall of Fame ring on his finger, no major documentaries on Peacock. So today we're asking, where is Bobby Fulton now? Before we dive into the present, let's rewind a bit. Bobby Fulton was born James Hines in 1960 in Ohio. Like a lot of kids growing up in the Midwest back then, he fell in love with wrestling early. But Bobby didn't just want to watch it, he wanted to be in that ring. And he didn't wait long. He was still a teenager when he started wrestling professionally. Not many guys can say that. Bobby paid his dues the old school way. He worked small towns, set up rings, and took bumps night after night just to earn respect. His big break came in the early 1980s when he teamed up with Tommy Rogers to form the Fantastics. Together, they were everything fans loved. Clean-cut, athletic, and fast-paced. They didn't need to cheat to win, and they didn't shout into the mic. They just showed up and put on a show. They had legendary feuds with teams like the Midnight Express. If you were around during that time, you probably remember those matches. The chemistry was unreal. The energy, the storytelling, the crowd getting louder with every move. It wasn't just wrestling, it was magic. Like a lot of wrestlers from his era, Bobby didn't exactly ride off into the sunset when the 90s came around. The wrestling world was changing, the territories were fading out, TV deals were taking over, and a lot of wrestlers, even the popular ones, had to figure out what was next. Bobby kept working. He didn't go to the WWE full-time, but he never walked away from wrestling either. In fact, he built something of his own. He started his own promotion, World Classic Professional Big Time Wrestling. It was a small operation focused on old school wrestling, the kind that fans who grew up in the 80s still missed. Bobby brought in legends, young talent, and tried to recreate that old feeling. It was personal to him. This wasn't just business. This was a way to keep the world he loved alive. But things haven't been easy. In recent years, Bobby's health has taken a serious hit. In 2019, Bobby Fulton was diagnosed with throat cancer. For someone who had made a living speaking to fans, cutting promos and being heard, this was a major blow. But he didn't give up. He went through treatment, fought through the pain, and after a tough journey, he managed to beat it. For a while, things seemed okay, but the fight wasn't over. In late 2024, Bobby shared heartbreaking news. His cancer had returned. This time it was even tougher. Along with cancer, he also started dealing with heart complications. For a man approaching his mid-60s, these weren't small issues. Many fans thought he would finally slow down, take time to rest, maybe step away from the spotlight for good. But Bobby wasn't ready for that. Instead of walking away, he doubled down. But this came with a price. World Classic Professional Big Time Wrestling, the promotion Bobby created and ran with pride, started facing serious heat around late 2024. What was once a feel-good revival of old-school wrestling started becoming a place of rumors, complaints, and some serious accusations. The heart of this controversy? Bobby's own son and co-owner, Dylan Hines. Dylan had been working closely with his father, not just in front of the audience, but also backstage. Together, they tried to keep the promotion running, bringing in old school names, hosting live shows in small towns, and connecting with diehard fans. But by the end of 2024, things took a turn that no one saw coming. Several wrestlers and crew members started speaking up online. Some said they were not paid after shows. Others mentioned issues like fake contracts and being misled about appearances. And slowly the noise became louder. What made this even more serious was the fact that many of the complaints weren't directed at Bobby himself, but at Dylan. Some alleged that he was taking money and not delivering on promises. There were talks of forged documents, screenshots of messages, and a lot of backstage drama that spilled out into public view. This controversy grew so much that Dylan ended up stepping away from the wrestling world entirely in January 2025. Just like that, Bobby Fulton lost his right-hand man, a person he trusted, worked with, and loved deeply. It wasn't just a business fallout, it was personal. Fans were torn. Some blamed Bobby, saying he should have kept a closer eye on things. Others defended him, saying he was being dragged into something he didn't control. After all, Bobby was dealing with health issues too, a recurrence of throat cancer, heart complications. This wasn't a man with the energy to fight legal fires or social media wars. Still, the damage was done. A major big-time wrestling event planned for March 2025 was quietly canceled. No big announcement, just a slow, awkward silence. The kind that hurts more than a loud goodbye. Through it all, Bobby didn't go online to rage or defend himself. He stayed mostly quiet. Once in a while, he'd post something about faith or about how he wasn't giving up. Those who followed him closely could tell. This was a man hurting deeply, trying to hold on to whatever was left. You'd think that after all this, Bobby would finally step away from it all. Let the business go. Rest. Heal. Focus on family and health. But no, in July 2025, Bobby Fulton was still in the game. He showed up at an event, suited up, shaking hands with fans and doing what he's always done, keeping the spirit of wrestling alive, not just as a promoter, but as someone who loves the business deep in his bones. Despite his ongoing battle with throat cancer, and after several hospital stays for heart-related issues, Bobby Fulton refuses to disappear. You can tell by his social media that he's tired, but he's also incredibly strong. He keeps saying he's trusting in God, that he's grateful for every day, that the show must go on. At almost 64, Bobby might not be taking bumps in the ring, but he's still calling the shots. He's still organizing events, working with local venues, and trying to give upcoming talent a place to perform. You'll find him talking to young wrestlers backstage, sharing stories, giving advice, encouraging them. That's his way of giving back. People in the industry who've known Bobby for years often say one thing: he's real. He's never pretended to be something he's not. He's made mistakes, sure, but he owns up to them. That kind of honesty is rare in this business, and while his brand isn't what it used to be, Bobby's name still carries weight. Fans still come out to see him. They still cheer when he steps into the spotlight. He may not headline the shows anymore, but his presence is what makes it special. In fact, one of the most touching things in recent months has been seeing how other wrestlers have stood by him. Some of his old friends from the NWA days, independent wrestlers, even newer stars, all have shown him support. Through tweets, through appearances, through kind words. Wrestling, for all its drama, still has a heart. There's also this growing appreciation for legends like Bobby, especially now. Younger fans are starting to discover what the older generation already knows. Guys like him built the road everyone else walks on. In one of his interviews from early 2025, Bobby said something that really stuck. He said, "People keep telling me to rest, but I rest when I sit with the fans and watch the matches. I rest when I pray. I rest when I remember how far I've come. But quitting? That's not in my blood." That right there, that's Bobby Fulton. Still pushing forward, still holding the mic, still shaking hands with fans, still showing up when it's easier to stay home. The world might not be watching him every day anymore. He may not trend on Twitter, but in community halls, gymnasiums, and state fairs across America, Bobby Fulton is still standing tall, still giving people a reason to believe in wrestling, still reminding everyone that even at 64, legends don't fade away easily. So where is Bobby Fulton now? He's still here, still fighting, still loving the business that gave him everything, and took a lot too. And as long as there's a ring and a few fans to cheer, he's not going anywhere. That takes a different kind of strength. Yes, Bobby had health issues, throat cancer, heart problems, major surgeries, but every time people thought he was done, he came back stronger. Not always physically, but with more love for what he stood for. Honesty, hard work, and respect. He's not in the Hall of Fame. Maybe he never will be. But for the fans who remember watching him live, or for the young wrestlers who got a chance to talk to him backstage, or even for the people watching this video and learning about him for the first time, Bobby's legacy lives on. Thanks for sticking around to hear his story. And hey, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. It really helps us bring more of these untold stories to light. Subscribe for more real, raw stories from the world of pro wrestling, the kind that don't always get the spotlight but still deserve to be remembered.